Okay, all right, everybody. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Vanessa, and I'm honored to open up this space for us to have a real open conversation about what's been on our hearts and minds following the election. So, tonight's discussion is brought to you by the Black Women in New Hampshire Collective. We're a community driven initiative that was created to amplify Black voices and work toward the long term well being of our community. We recognize that many of us have things to say, perspectives to share, and truths to speak. And that's exactly why we're here. Just to give a little bit more background on the Black Women in New Hampshire Collective, we're committed to building spaces that support Black resilience, leadership, and community empowerment here in New Hampshire and nearby. While not all of our panelists tonight are members of our collective, we're all part of the broader socialite community, which includes Black women, femmes, and non binary people from this region. Together, we're building connections, solidarity, and having honest conversations like the one we're about to have. Tonight, we'll be exploring a range of topics, including the feelings many of us are having about the election, the complexities surrounding solidarity or lack thereof from other communities, and the challenges Black women face in the political spotlight. We'll also be touching on ways we can look to our history, including the cooperative movements and community led efforts that have always been part of our resilience. Now, it's important to acknowledge that Black women are not a monolith. We come from diverse backgrounds and perspectives, and not all views can be represented in one conversation. But tonight, we're here to share openly and honestly from our unique perspectives with respect and understanding for each other. And with that, I'd like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. And first, I will turn it over to Deborah.
Um, Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah Kamala. I work for the Disability Rights Center of New Hampshire, and I'm the community outreach specialist. And I live in a world and have a son that is very severely impacted by a disability. And some of us at home have children that are disabled one way or another. And I want to shout out to say we need to come out and lift up our voices in spaces that we hesitate to have our voice heard, because I believe that we all belong at the table and not in the folding chair, but the same chair that everybody else pulls up to the table for. So I come from that, and I'm old enough to have lost my niceness. I am a kind person, but don't ask me if you don't want to know the answer.
Thank you, Deborah. We're happy that you're able to be with us this evening. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Jess.
Hello, I'm Jess. I am in Lowell, Massachusetts. I have a son. I am on the communication and marketing for the BWINH Social Club. And yeah, I'm just happy to be here tonight.
Yes, thank you, Jess. And last but not least, Teresa.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Teresa, and I'm from Michigan. I grew up in New Hampshire. And pretty much about me is I'm always rooting for the underdog. So that's, anyone that's black or brown or LGBTQ. I'm always rooting for the ones that get counted out. So that's me.
All right. And Teresa is also part of our Black Women in New Hampshire collective. And then I'll just share a little bit more about myself. I'm also a member of the collective. Again, my name is Vanessa. I grew up in New Hampshire, but I was born in Ohio. I was the first generation in my family after many generations to be born outside of Georgia. That's where my people are from. I started the Black Women in New Hampshire Social Club back in 2020 at a time when a lot of us, our lives were turned upside down, not only with the pandemic, but the ongoing murder of Black people by police and the resulting, civil unrest as a result of that. So I wanted to turn to community in my time of need, and I felt the need to create a space for all of us to be together. And then through the social club, I came to get to know other women who shared similar passion and vision for how we can help, protect and sustain the Black community up this way. And we then started our nonprofit collective Black Women in New Hampshire. So, very happy to be holding space for this conversation tonight. And with that, I'd like to start our discussion off by just checking in with our panelists and seeing how are you feeling after the election results. And so I'd like to turn it over to Jess, if you could start us out first.
Well, for me, I didn't vote because I was never registered to vote. Um, being raised as a Jehovah's Witness, we're not supposed to vote, but I'm no longer a Jehovah's Witness, but I just never registered. So I didn't vote, but I don't know. I my thoughts were to go towards Trump if I were to vote because when he was in office, I made money, more money than I'm making now, and I don't know, whatever he says he's going to do, he does. He may sound like an idiot sometimes, but some of his policies I don't agree with, some of them I do. So I feel, I don't know. I believe our votes don't even count anyway. They already know who they're going to choose. That's just my thought. And that's another reason why I never really decided to register to vote because I feel like they already know what they're doing. They're the same, they all work together. So those are my thoughts. I didn't vote, but I feel like whoever won, it was going to be a disaster anyway. So seeing how things go.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much that you've shared in your response that I'm sure a lot of people will have a reaction or thoughts around. And so we definitely want to make sure that we're providing space for those opposing, quote unquote, opposing views that are held within our community too. But I just appreciate your transparency in terms of, coming out and sharing, your thoughts and feelings. And I know that takes a lot of, courage to do. So I appreciate that. And we will definitely, hear a little bit more about your views on this topic as the conversation unfolds. So I'd like to turn it over to Teresa. How are you feeling after the election results?
I feel that, I mean, I did vote, but I do feel that they both were not the best candidates, but I feel like that's every 4 years. We never, it's like we just can't find two decent candidates. But I will say that now that Trump is back in office, I do think that we'll see more aggressive behaviors from people, and I do think that there will be an uptick in hate crimes.
Okay. So feeling maybe a little bit of like anxiety around the potential for that stuff to resurge again.
Yeah, because I am nervous. I feel like even though a lot of us are not part of the LGBTQ community, I think that's going to be one of the first group that he does attack, and I do feel that if you take away one group's rights, well, who's to say he won't take away the next? You know what I mean? So I just feel like he's going to start with the weakest and then just work his way up. So I do have anxiety about rights being taken away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Deborah, how about you? How are you feeling?
I feel a sense that I've known Trump for many years. I'm a New Yorker. I know exactly what he did in New York. I know his behavior. Um, so I was never impressed when the first time around. And I live in a town in New Hampshire that's very Trumpy. And how many times can I be called the N word? And how many times can you? I stand my ground, but what I felt this election was the sadness and the realization that as a people, how undereducated we are in things about how does the economy work? What is the president's actual role? Um, when when you say certain things and certain judgments, and Jessica, this is not. I'm not targeting you, okay? It's just like who when an incoming president is coming into like a good economy, right? That's not the new president. It's a holdover, and we need to be able to realistically look at our candidates, whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you agree or disagree. And I, I think our voices matter in ways that voting happens.
Hmm. So I heard, you expressed some sadness, sounds like some disappointment as well, that you're feeling maybe over how, like, the decisions that our community made and some opportunity for some things that could be done differently in the future to engage people.
You know, I grew up in a different generation, right? And I grew up with my grandmother telling me about my ancestors and civil rights and things at the kitchen table. I did not want to be there, but I realized that she was the one providing me with that information that I'm leaning heavily on now. And how it's we don't do that anymore. We depend on the school systems to do so much more because we got to work, we got to do this, we have to do that. Life is taken over, and we've lost those community interrelationships where we hand down information, whether it's your grandma or the auntie across the street who really wasn't your auntie, but you better knew that you needed to start her name with auntie. Um, we're missing a lot of that.
Yes, we absolutely are. And we're going to touch on more about the our legacy and history with community and how we can get back on track. But I wanted to kind of just share my feelings on that. So just for the audience's purposes, I'm playing like a dual role tonight. I'm a facilitator and a participant. So I just wanted to share like how I was feeling, and I would say that like I've been feeling more energized since last week when the results were announced. And that's because like I really didn't have any expectations going into this election cycle, because I did wasn't looking to it as a source of safety for me. I made the decision to divest from electoral politics back in 2016 when I learned the hard lesson that this whole system can be easily manipulated against the will of the people. And so I like had a crash course and sort of coming to the realization that we can't put our all of our eggs in any one particular basket, but definitely not in a system that is so easily manipulated and rigged and against the will of the people. So I going into this election cycle, I held no expectations. I wasn't betting on either candidate because I saw both as equally sort of disastrous for the people because I don't think either party, honestly, um, has the best interest of the people at heart. I think with like Republicans, they're a lot more transparent about their agenda. Like, you could take them at like face value. They come out and tell you that they don't like anybody that's different from them, and they want to get rid of everybody. They want to make America great. It's all, again, it's all in the slogan, right? So I don't have any expectations of safety from people like that, but I also don't feel that way about Democrats either. I think Democrats do a better job of coming off and pretending like they're for these marginalized populations, but anytime that they've had an opportunity to provide more permanent protection and safety for these groups, they haven't. So I cannot, in good conscience, put my faith in either party. So I was able to manage my expectations around the news for this election, so that I didn't have to experience that, um, the feelings of fear or like, you know, um, hopelessness, because I did all of that back in 2016. I went through that whole thing of like bargaining and like being confronted with like, I thought these people were have my back and all of that. I did that in 2016, so I've made my peace with all of that. So I'm better able to manage my expectations. So I've been having different feelings because of that. I've been feeling more energized because now I'm seeing people want to engage more in the type of conversations and discourse that we need to be having. I'm seeing people looking for ways to get involved. And so as much as it pains me to see other people going through like sadness and devastation, like I don't take any joy in seeing people, feel this way. I would like to think though that it will act as a catalyst for us to get even more involved. And so I think that this question in and of itself did a really good job just showing the diversity of thought and perspective that exists within our community, and why it's important that we listen to each other and not have any, like, not make generalizations about, our community, which leads me to our next question. What are some common sentiments that you're noticing within your networks about the election, especially regarding things like fears for our safety and rights? So I want to turn it over to Teresa first, only because you really touched on this in your response in terms of feeling a little bit of fear and anxiety around particularly the queer community and their rights, being stripped under Trump. So is that a common sentiment that you're seeing within your network, or do you kind of feel alone in that feeling?
Um, what do you mean, like in the Black community? Do I feel, or do you mean just like my peers? Period.
Well, what do you see on like social media or wherever you've been talking about this or hearing discourse
Yeah. So,
talking? Yeah.
um, I've been seeing like fears around like LGBTQ rights being taken away, women's rights being taken away. So I just been hearing a lot of people just afraid that they're just gonna um, start losing their rights. Fear that because their police are going to get immunity, they're just going to be more willy nilly killing people without consequences, or even a fear of a consequence, which could sometimes deter someone from doing something bad, and that's now going to be taken away as well. So I just feel like it's just going to go to more like a. I know Trump really supports the North Korean president, Jim Jung or whatever his name is. I know that he was like really admiring him and the way he ran his country. So I think that Trump does like dictators. So I'm just afraid that that's going to be something similar. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like my peers have been saying maybe not that, but they're afraid of losing their rights.
Okay. And yeah, Deborah, what are you seeing from your network? What are some of the common sentiments you're seeing from your networks about this?
I spend a majority of my time in white spaces, and they they want to spend more time making themselves comfortable, you know, um, and asking questions like, if I wear this bruised bracelet, will this tell people that I'm a safe person? And, when they ask me that question, I always go, no, because somebody who's not a safe person can put on a blue bracelet too, so why not dig a little deeper? Uh, I need, we need co-conspirators, not allies who are going to be like in the background and say, I gave you $1. I feel better, don't you? And I often say, uh, you bring the shovel, I'll bring the pickaxe, and we'll just bury this body in the forest together. So we are doing something together that's meaningful and shoulder to shoulder. And I can't, you want to know how to be radicalized. And I said, I have 450 years to show you, of experience. And so would read whatever book you think that's going to help you, but please don't ask me. I am not your leaning tree. But they, and then when I get to my um, community that I belong in my family, it's it's hard to hear people talking about survival plans. And in our family, I do have a father who is a Holocaust survivor, right? He's not in the country anymore. He's seen this. And Trump has vocalized what he's going to do, and he will do it. He's at that point, and I I don't want to call him Hitler like. I don't want to, compare him to people, but he's a dangerous man. And we need to engage, but not in the same way that we have engaged with politics before, because sometimes I think what happens is that we want to hold certain people up on a pedestal and complain about them, and then other people, um, we don't. We have to get rid of our own biases, and please, dear God, get rid of the misogyny that we hold on ourselves.
I will say that the only thing which I think the main reason why people were flipping, at least in our community, is because he was like making it rain. He was almost like Oprah, you get a car, you get a car, you get it. Like he was giving money to everybody during the pandemic, and now we're suffering. So people equate that to, oh, Trump was giving everybody money during the pandemic, and we were like, there was a surplus of money. I mean, there was money being handed out every which way, and now people are struggling. So people's, and I'm just speaking from what my observation. I feel that people are like, oh my God, when Trump was president, everyone had money in our bank accounts were fat, and now it's like $5 to buy a gallon of milk. So I think that's a lot of reasons why people flipped.
Right, and part of the problem with that, I think, is that we didn't know the story behind it. All right, because we got that money, the Congress and Senate voted on that. He couldn't veto it. He knew he couldn't veto it. So he held up those checks until his name was on the check. It was the greatest marketing ploy I have ever seen. So people always say Trump did it because that his name was on the check. And it wasn't Trump. It was another system in our government that did it.
Yeah, and I'll say that I think that this creates a lesson learned to the Democrats who say they're in opposition to Trump. Again, from my perspective, they're the same. That's just want to be clear with where I'm coming from. So this is coming from a place of curiosity, like for me. But I think one of the things that Trump does really well, and I'm by no means a pro-Trumper, but is that he appeals to people's emotion, right? Rather than, I think sometimes people like think the answer to everything is just, oh, we just need more teaching, we just need more education, we just need to make more people aware. But it actually comes down to how you made them feel at the end of the day. And for better or worse, there were people in the Black community that felt safer under Trump. And I think this is the time to ask them questions around why that was the case and stuff, instead of maybe just immediately jumping to conclusions around why we think that they felt a certain way. And guess what? We have somebody with us this evening that might be able to provide some perspective. So I want to ask Jess, like, what are some of the common sentiments that you're noticing within your networks, considering you have a bit of a different view on, this election?
Well, a lot of people that I talk to, or they talk to me about it, they hate that he won. He's the devil. He's this. He's gonna send the country to hell. All this stuff. And I just sit and listen because I'm not really into politics. I'm not gonna lie. I I'm not into it like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I let them say their thing. They're like, he's a dictator. He told the Christians you only got to vote once, and that means he's gonna stay president forever. And they just that's just how they feel. But on the other hand, a lot of people like Trump's gonna save the day. They bring up the Bible. Oh, the trumpet in the Bible, yada yada yada. They go that route, and I'm like, okay. And I just let
Mm-hmm.
them talk because I don't really have an opinion on it, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
people love them, and people hate them.
Sounds like you're noticing a mix of sentiments then, based on, you know, your um your network. And I do have like a follow-up question to this one, but I want to kind of share like what I've been observing in my networks. So one, I don't really have any out and out pro Trumpers in my networks. If there are any, they're really keeping that a dirty secret. So I didn't have that experience that a lot of people had this past election cycle, where they woke up and they found out their friend for like 20 years voted for Trump and stuff like that. So that didn't happen to me this time around. That happened back in 2016. So that I will tell you that, like, I don't know anything about what's going on that side of the political spectrum in terms of like conversations that have been going on since the election. But what I do have a lot in my network are a lot of like um, liberals and leftists and people who lean more toward the left of the political the spectrum. And I think like something that we've kind of touched on already that I'm noticing in terms of the people who seem to be the most devastated, like Deborah, you hit on this in your response where you talk like, I work in a white environment, and so you've had to kind of see the white people process, right, real time in front of you, even though they are still of like a very privileged group, and it was white people who overwhelmingly voted for Trump. They're still very vocal in their distress about things, and almost looking for like everybody else to do the emotional labor for them. And that's kind of the general, like, what I've seen. Like, I was just really struck by who has been the most vocal and loudest about their feelings of grief and like distress. And it, because I'm like a pattern recognizer, and a lot of the people who have been very outspoken about it also hold multiple privileged identities. And so to me, it was more of like a validation that um, people don't care about your battles until it's their battle, until it's at their front door. Because a lot of the things that people are now afraid are going to happen under Trump have been real life for certain, groups of people for a long time, and they've been begging and pleading with us to take up their causes and to secure their rights and make more permanent like sort of protections. And so, that's just one thing that has really stood out to me, is like who's been the most like vocal with their displeasure, their grief. And again, I'm not invalidating anybody's feelings. I'm not saying, oh, you have no right to feel that way. But what I am asking people to reflect on is that these were very real issues way before this election, before the results were announced, and they should have been taken seriously this entire time. We shouldn't only pay attention when there's somebody with an opposing political view sitting in the position of power in the United States. So I've also been really disgusted and disappointed to see some of the people who say, like, oh, I was voting for Kamala because I didn't want Trump to take away like gay rights or immigrant rights or, you know, all of these other the rights of the marginalized groups. But now they are saying, you know what, I'm drawing back my support of like the pro-Palestine movement, of the trans rights, movement and stuff, because they feel like these groups didn't vote in the way that they should have. And I think that that's more of a reflection of the people who are now walking back their support in those areas and never having been an ally or in solidarity with these movements in the first place. So my question to people is always like, what are we willing to do about it, right? What are you willing to do when it comes time, for when Trump goes after the immigrants, goes after, trans people, goes after these marginalized groups? What are you willing to risk and stuff? And also acknowledging where we hold privilege, even as Black people. There are those of us who hold privilege identities as well, and just making sure that we're aware of when we are coming from a position of privilege and power in our views. So that's kind of what I've been noticing. But I'm curious, like, to hear from you guys around like those of you that are noticing like more of an increase in people expressing like fear and anxiety around the future. Were these things that people were, talking about back when Joe Biden was president? Were people like these same people, were you noticing the same amount of chatter around like fear and concern over trans rights, women's rights, immigrant rights, all of that?
I I think um, when you look at the Biden administration, a lot of a lot of communities had a lot of issues that they needed addressed, but they took a deep breath, sort of thing. I if people felt that they could still now protest, they could bring up their issues, they could confront, where they were not sure with Trump administration if they could do that. Um, but at the same time, now um, I hear people struggling with one issue voting, which seems to be was a huge problem for a lot of people. And so, what I'm trying to say is, we often in our history as Americans, we reach a point and we sort of take a deep breath, and we sort of we have to take several steps backwards to go forward again. And I think the Biden administration, people took a deep breath a little bit because they were more concerned with prices had soared and things weren't getting done. So they took this deep breath and they didn't expect to have to deal with Trump again. So it's more of a shock. And, you know, and you really, I think this time around, a lot of us found out who we can trust and who we could not. I
Mm.
personally, not a lot of people were in the office the day after election but I was crying in my office silently, in my office, and I could hear them going to who was in, how you doing, and nobody came into my office. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, I said to my boss, I'll let you know, I don't trust any of you. So if you're gonna fire me, today would be a good day to do it. And and the silver lining now is the understanding that we have to come together. We can't stay in this silo. We have to do more things to be actually a partner, a collaborating partner. But it shouldn't have taken a bad election to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one thing that I would like to part of the community is um, to be wary of being lulled into a false sense of security. Because I know that there seems to be this feeling that when we have, like, there's a Democrat in a position of power, that we're better off under them. And that depends on your definition of better, right? Like for me, we're not, I have the mentality of we're not free until we're all free. So as long as there's a, any group of people that is still being oppressed, I don't consider myself safe, right? Because we talked about, like, they'll go for one group first and then they get just keep going and going and going for them because it's about total control and domination. And so, when people say things like, oh, I'm afraid of like no longer being able to protest, well, they've been rolling back our rights around protest since the Obama administration. And
I,
so that would have been the time, right? And it's not too late. I'm not saying like we missed the boat, but like I think for some of us there needs to be an acknowledgement of when we may be blind to offenses and right violations of
I,
our rights when it's done by a certain party. I'm just looking for people to bring the same energy they bring for one party to both of
I,
them.
I, I am going to say this. Democrats tend to be, I'm not going to say, they're afraid to say the whole truth. But in the Black community, right, we have given away a lot of our power because we don't build up Black leaders, right? And I mean that, people say I'm not political, but you got to trust somebody to tell you what's going on. You know, at the same time, so we haven't done that in a long, long time, and the leaders that we believed in are mainly dead now. So it's you haven't built that community because I think it's justifiable if you tell me that you are not interested in politics, okay, but I am, and I don't necessarily want to run for anything, but I know how to do the mix, and I come back and say A, B, C, and D. Here's the concern. You know, the Palestinian issue is not what it should be, but we know that we can slow down armament to Israel if we do A, B, and C, and that means us speaking up too. Right. So all those things, but if you're not interested in that, you're not interested in that, but build the leaders who are, who have gained your
Yeah.
trust.
And I think another thing, as a Black community that we can learn from history, and again, I'm somebody who looks for patterns and stuff, is this um, phenomenon. And I don't want to say that it's exclusive to the Black community, but that's the community I'm a part of, so that's what I'm going to speak about. But
Mm-hmm.
this phenomenon that happens where we do have leaders in the community who are speaking up on issues, but because they're going against the dominant narrative of in the community, which right now, and the numbers show this, is that most Black people support Democrats, right? When there are people who don't toe the line with that, they are not they're not welcome with open arms. They are vilified, And then when they're dead, if we have the luxury of hindsight, in the future, people are then want to invoke their name. I mean, we see this a lot with like Malcolm X and, even Harriet Tubman. There were people, Black people during her time that thought she was just a troublemaker and, up to no good. So we have to also keep in mind that like our current view on who makes a good leader for our community is often warped and conditioned by white supremacist ideals. And so we have to, if we want to encourage like for people to step up and be community leaders, we've got to be prepared for a wide variety of views and not feel that we are beholden to any one, specific side of it. The only agenda that I have that I'd like to pivot to our next question is to influence the black people to get more involved in our community. That's it. You choose your adventure, choose your own adventure, choose what flavor that takes for you, but by all means, get involved. And so the next question I want to pose is, how do you feel about the role that other racial groups played in this election? Do you feel like we had their support? And I'd like to start with Teresa for this one.
Well, I was just looking at some of the, um, it was like by race who voted Republican and who voted Democrat and who voted by gender as well. Um, and it showed that a lot of the other minorities actually switched and voted Republican when previously the last was 4 years ago when Biden won, it was less Republicans. So it did look like they switched parties, but I will say I did some of the chatter that I did hear for the ones that did switch and are very proud that they did switch. So it's not like a secret anymore or shameful from what I've seen for the ones for the minorities that did vote. They're not ashamed at all, and I'm not saying that they should be. Um, but they're just like, yep, and some of the reasons were like, they didn't feel that um, Kamala Kamala was a strong opponent, um, that she was never answering questions. The other reason, Trump can bring more money. Trump is more aggressive, and just things like that were the reasons. Also, they said that they didn't feel that Kamala did anything um, as a vice president. So that was just some of the reasons that I heard for the minorities voting Republican. So life is about perception, and they perceive that. Who am I to say that that's not their truth? But I just felt that just listening to how Trump was before he was president and when he was just famous or whatever, and how he was like not letting black people into his establishments, like he wouldn't let them rent apartments, and just some of the other things that he did that was just like shady business. And I mean, and granted, they are politicians are all liars if you really think about it, So I do feel that it wasn't made for us, when Republicans and Democrats were invented. I don't feel like it was with us in mind. So I am aware of that neither one are really for us if you really think about it. So I do wish that we can dismantle and just reinvent or maybe create some of our own laws. We've been in the country long enough for the ones that are into law. Maybe we can create some laws for us, like for example, the Asians created laws for them, or whoever created the laws for them. Maybe we can do that too and create laws for us where no matter who's in office, we're protected. Um, but I will say that at least Democrats aren't inciting, um, well, at least from my perception, what I've seen. I'm not. I know, Vanessa, you said that you heard afterwards they were saying, "Oh, we're not going to vote for Palestine" and things like that. Um, I haven't seen that, but I'm not saying, that's just has what I haven't seen. But from on Trump's side, I've always heard him like just inciting violence and people marching with their rifles, going to different cities to protect people from protesting and just people getting. I don't know. It just seemed like when they jumped the White House. If I feel like if Obama
Hmm.
did that, they would be. We would never forget that Obama basically okayed everyone storming the White House. You know what I'm saying? He might not have said it in those words, but if you read between the lines. So I don't know. Yeah, they both are not for us, but at least the Democrats are not as. I don't know. I just feel like they're more creating laws or stipulations for the underdog, but obviously
Yeah.
always with them first in mind. They're always thinking about themselves first. But I think that's both parties.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and thank you for sharing some of the statistics or commentary on the statistics, but it sounds like you felt like maybe we didn't have the support of the other racial groups. This election, you commented on that there were some shifts that happened where different minority racial groups voted maybe for more towards the Democrat side of things in the past, but this time they voted for Trump. So, what do you think, or maybe what did you come across in like your research? Like, why do you think that solidarity was lacking from from some of those groups this time around?
Well,
Is it like, are there
for
specific factors or misunderstandings, stuff like that?
mm, I just think that, like I said, they felt the main reason what I heard was even from the older folks was the job that I do. I get to communicate with a lot of different people in the community, and they're just like, like the money's gonna be is gonna be better, economy's gonna be better, jobs and money and just things like that. They were just concerned about. Um, And I guess even some of like the natives, which I was kind of surprised about. So I'm not sure why they did. They can only, I guess, answer that. But I do think that a lot of it has to do with the economy, and sometimes people that can pass are white passing because they are Latinos and Latinas that can pass. Um, I felt
I,
like they were more like, okay, yeah, they were just like kind of forgetting some of the things that he even said to their own people, you know?
Yeah, and
I,
I just wanted
I,
to touch on real quick, and then I'll turn it over to you, Deb. You mentioned something about Native Americans that I feel um, like bad if I didn't mention this, but more has come to light around some of the exit poll data. So what I'll
Mhm,
say to be succinct is to take it with a grain of salt. The number that showed like natives overwhelmingly supported Trump, they only asked
mhm,
229 people.
mhm.
229 people do not represent, I think there's like somewhere between 4 to 8 million indigenous
Yeah,
Americans
no.
in the US. So again, we got to be careful of like who benefits from getting us to do that, like that Spider-Man meme, right? And pointing the finger at each other. But I just wanted to call that out only because I've seen it referenced so much. And I just want to make sure that we understand
I,
that these exit polls can be flawed. Always look to see how many people were asked like a certain question, and just keep in mind that like this, it's more of an art than a science type of things.
I,
Deborah.
I think the elephant that's in the room, okay, that we need to hit on is um, white supremacy. We have always been a racist country, um, and people, even our own people, sometimes look to reach that whiteness that they perceive as better than, and it it is hard for us to say not only was it white supremacy, but somewhere in my heart, When somebody says, well, they didn't know what Kamala did as a vice president, all right? Did we ever know what the vice president does or does not do? Because it's not their job. I can put that aside, but this country was not ready to see a woman, a madam president, and that's how they voted. And that's okay. But it is really the misogyny and white supremacy. And as I listen to some of my friends in the Latino community, they'll say, well, I came here legally. So everybody has to come here legally. Well, the biggest one I heard from a Latino friend was, excuse me, but those who are coming across the border now are drug dealers, rapists, and criminally insane. And I know their backstory, and I say, you weren't? So all of this is mixing up into the voting that we're seeing and rising up. But we're not really talking about that. You know, I might appear, I am an independent that tends to lean left, but I do not hesitate to vote Republican when I feel that is a better candidate. We gotta have some biases that we have to get over. Because there's nothing wrong with being a Republican or a Democrat or independent as long as we're not hating on each other. I tell the Democrats all the time, could you just get a little rod in your backbone and just say what you're meaning? Because they they dance around it. Yeah. But we have to have a voice, right? You know, somebody saying to me, well, she didn't do or she didn't do. I said, but do you hear the hate that's going on here? You're okay with that. That's fine, but tell me that.
Mm. Yeah, Jess, what are your thoughts on this question of racial solidarity from your perspective?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah. So why do you think solidarity from the Black community was lacking from some groups? Do you think there were factors or misunderstandings at play? And I guess because if you look at the data, Black people who voted overwhelmingly voted for Kamala, right? And so I know that there are many in the Black community that view that as a strong showing of solidarity amongst us, and that folks viewed her as the answer to Trump, right? So why do you think we didn't see that same solidarity from other races about that viewpoint?
Well, I think because Black people voted for Kamala because they wanted a Black person and they wanted a Black woman. But hold on a second.
Sure.
He's fine.
I lost my train of thought.
You were saying Black people
people.
voted for Kamala. They wanted a Black person.
Oh yeah. And I just feel, and the white people voted for Trump because, like Deborah said, it's white supremacy, and they just want to keep all the power. And I feel Black people didn't vote. Some Black people didn't vote for Kamala because she, I don't know. I know Deborah said, what does the vice president actually do? But I haven't seen her do anything in the last 4 years. Like, even when she was the attorney general, she didn't do
See, and that's the sad thing
a good job.
because I have to say that's a sad thing of marketing and the sad thing when you're a politician that and you're running, when you're in that race, it's a lot of times that negative press, and it could stick to you. But when you go back and research her as Attorney General, she did a lot for the state of California. But it's like, I only
And,
know that because I'm interested in those things.
yeah, and I think we also have to acknowledge that a lot is subjective, right? That term a lot is very subjective, and then it depends on what your values are, right? And whether or not Kamala aligns to those values, whether or not you perceived her time as Attorney General, District Attorney, um, as being a success or not. So I think this is where we have to recognize that sometimes there is no objective truth here, because it's all based on somebody's lived experiences, their values. A number of different factors go into whether we all see the same person in a certain way, or not. And so I think, like, for
It,
me, where I like struggle, because again, I've already come out and said, like, I'm not hanging my hat on electoral politics. I find that Black people have always been protected. We've provided our own protection and coverage and our own source of, like, quote unquote freedom and liberation for ourselves. So I don't have any skin in the game when it comes to these sorts of things. But for the folks that do, it's a numbers game, and it's about swaying people to your side. And the way that you do that is by understanding their current position point and meeting them where they're at, and not necessarily viewing them as less knowledgeable or less moral, or things like that. Because when you begin to do that, you write people off, and you write them off too prematurely, and then you miss some really good insight that could help you advance your cause of voting even further, and winning more people to your side. So that's kind of what comes up for me in these conversations a lot of times. But I would, like, on racial solidarity, I guess I never felt like I view these things in a lot, because I'm immediately suspicious of all these different, like, graphs being shown, and our immediate result is to point the finger at other racial minorities. That reeks of white supremacy to me. So I immediately suspect, and I'm like, I don't want no part of this. But at the same time, I am of the belief that anti-Blackness is a constant in this country. And it's something that is perpetuated by all races, even Black people perpetuate anti-Blackness. So when you accept that as a constant in this country, it kind of changes the way you see things. So I had no expectation of solidarity from other races, because I know anti-Blackness is embedded into the fabric of this country. Of course, there are always exceptions, because I never like to, cast a wide net or paint an entire group of people with a broad brush. There are always exceptions. There are always going to be people of other colors that will unpack their anti-Blackness and put their own comfort and safety at risk for Black people. But we have to, you know, recognize and come to the hard truth that when you're conditioned in a white supremacist culture, you're conditioned to be anti-Black. And that's just a given, right? I want it to be different. I wish it wasn't true, but none of doing those things doesn't make it a reality. That's just our truth. And so the faster we accept that, in my book, the more we're able to redirect the energy that we're spending um, convincing other people of our humanity and our right to exist and our right to dignity. Call that energy back home that you're putting into, put it in our community, put it into reaching across the aisle to other Black people and forming communities with each other. As you were saying, Deborah, getting back to being a community with each other. Throughout the entire course of history for Black people, we've always had different views and mindsets and stuff like that. So these things have been present throughout our history, and we have always found a way to work across them. And that's what I want to encourage people to fall back on in the midst of seeing sort of the numbers, but also be skeptical and wary of these numbers, y'all. That's just something I'm going to say. Just be skeptical and wary, because who benefits from us turning the finger on each other as people of color? White
I,
supremacy does.
I'm going to say this. I agree with most of what you're saying, okay, Vanessa, but unfortunately, I'm going to say this as an old school black, all right? Those numbers don't tell a new story. They're telling the same story that they have always told throughout our existence. And I wouldn't be skeptical of them. It's just the reality, of our long history. And I would be more skeptical of people coming up to me and say, "How can I keep you safe?" You know, that's what I feel skeptical about. It's more like, "Can you go work with your people? Because I don't have time to do that. You go back and you figure out how you can be in solidarity with me without me straining my resources on me." And I think the Black community has spent a lot of resources trying to get them to be more than allies.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Because
we're in agreement with that.
those numbers have been almost, I mean, they fluctuate, but the underlying numbers have always been there and always been the same.
Yep. Which, I think I acknowledge, right, that anti-blackness is a constant in this country. And I have guiding principles for my life that help me protect my peace. And one thing that a hard truth that I accepted a while ago is I have no expectation of safety from anybody white. Period, point blank. That's just how I operate in life. And there, you can earn my trust, but it's very rare that you're going to get close enough to me to do that. I'm not encouraging others to have the same, to live their life the same way. I'm explaining sort of how, so basically preaching to the choir here, right? And that's why I'm like unapologetically pro-black. That's why I started a social club for Black women, not women of color. This is why I dedicated. I'm betting on Black. That's my guiding principle in life. So yes, this is not a new issue. The division between Black people and other people of color, and at the same time we should question narratives that uphold like whiteness and stuff like that.
I, I am married to a white Italian man. And I will tell you now, after 43 years, sometimes I wonder if he's white or not. Because some of his actions, he has learned and immersed himself in my culture that I have to remind him, please stop saying po po, because, in this house, we don't say that. And I say that with all due respect is because I know he and his family have my back, and they would go toe to toe with the Black community. But I consider him an exception and his family an exception and not the whole.
Right. Yeah, I don't have the luxury of given time to figure out if a white person is safe or not. This is just how I conserve my energy and choose to conduct myself. Now, anybody who knows me knows that like I'm I'm half white myself. I had a child with a white person, so I have white people in my life at the same time as holding that belief. But I want to move on to talking more about like Kamala's experience and her policy impacts, because this came up, right? So just you made a comment about not feeling like Kamala had accomplished enough, or you noticed that was a sentiment that was being shared in your network, that they felt Kamala wasn't like a strong enough candidate, they weren't knowledgeable enough of, around what she accomplished, or however it was phrased. And then Deborah, you shared like that, oh, as Attorney General, she actually accomplished a lot. So we're going to talk a little bit about her experience and policy. So, what are your thoughts on how Kamala has been treated as a Black woman in this campaign and in office? So, setting aside like her campaign promises and stuff like that, how do you think that she was treated just as a Black woman?
She was treated like a Black woman. She was treated, I mean, it's kind of interesting because we've just talked about anti-Blackness and a little bit of misogyny going on. She was treated like a Black woman. And one of the greatest things I think that she did, and I knew about it before she was running, she went after, during her time as AG, the fraudulent uh, mortgage practices, right? And she won, right? But she went up against Obama to say, you can't say, give me $6 million and tell those people to be happy. It was, it was, she she got some billions of money back to her constituents. And I thought she had to go up against her own party to get that done. And she wasn't afraid to do it. So I am not saying there's no flawless person, but there were some really pretty impressive things that she has done in her political career that we just didn't know. And she was just treated as just a Black woman. There was this, she couldn't possibly have the emotional maturity to be president. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
I just, all those things that our mamas might have done to break the glass ceiling, we were sort of paving over the cracks a little bit.
Yeah. Teresa, Jess, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on how Kamala was treated as a Black woman in the campaign?
I feel she
I
was treated.
definitely.
Oh,
Okay, you go, Jess. You go, Jess.
I think she was treated how they treat all of us, the same, like no respect and stuff like that. But I mean, I think she did good standing up for herself and stuff. But they treated her like they would have treated any one of us.
1,000% agree. I think they treated her like she was just like uneducated, came out, just what they think of us, you know what I mean? Like how any one of us could have just ran and they would have treated us all the same, no matter what accomplishments she had. Whether you agree with her or not agree with her, you do have to give her props and say that she did earn her way to that position, you know what I mean? And that she is a smart woman. But yeah, they treated her just like they treat all Black women, unloved and unappreciated. And our qualities, we have to work 10,000 times as harder just to even get an ounce of recognition. That's how they treated her.
Mm. Yeah, that's what I mean. I said pretty on par with what Black women experience in general, right? She wasn't given a pass at all, even with all of the accomplishments and degrees. And at the end of the day, that's what this country is going to do, I think, to us. And so, my question for our community is like, what do we do with this this information, and how do we reconcile it with other statistics, like how more and more Black women are getting like autoimmune disease because of stress, or dying of heart disease, cancers, stuff like this, because we're stressing ourselves to death trying to achieve accomplishment and success of these predominantly white institutions and stuff. So for me, I think there's also a lesson for us. I'm not blaming the victim at all in this, whatsoever. On paper, she should have, right, just with her qualifications, but it shows you that office it's not about who's most qualified. I mean, that's been proven twice now, right? With like Trump getting into to office. So it's not about who's most qualified. It's not about who's the most moral. It's rigged. It's a rigged sort of system, in my opinion. So I think that's just something that I would like for us as Black women to think about, is like, what does that say to us, and how might we pivot in our life? And then, I think that, we haven't talked about this explicitly, but it's kind of come up that there have been concerns shared and voiced around Kamala's track record and stuff like that. So how do you reconcile sort of the pride some of us feel seeing a Black woman run for such a high power office, with the concerns about her policies on issues like Palestine, trans rights, or her track record of criminal justice in this, state of California? So how are you able to hold those tensions if you're somebody who feels like pride in seeing, somebody like her somebody like us run for office? How is that balanced with sort of the concerns that have been expressed around her policies on things like Palestine, trans rights, and her track record on criminal justice?
I think I think when she answered some of her questions, she went to her lawyer side,
Mm,
and she would say things like, "We need to follow the law," okay, and that could be feel very damaging. I'm a doctor, so I know what the law is in trans rights. You cannot do a um, reversing care until you're 18. Or that's the law. So when people are saying, "Oh, she doesn't care about that," I I asked her staff, "What is she saying? What is she actually saying?" Well, she's saying that you can get gender affirming care, but you can't have the final surgery until you're we consider 18 as an adult. And when I think about it, and the hoops that if someone at 17 and a half wants to have the surgery, the hoops that they have to jump through is an important hoop to jump through to have that surgery so they can heal before they go on, transition into adulthood and moving to college and things like that. So I think, one, we have to ask clarifying questions. And two, we need to lose some of our own um, biases around women. In in I There are so many Black women head of households that our culture is really a matriarchy more than we would like to admit. But I remember some of the things that my mother would say to my brother. And okay, I just love that, Jessica. So, I, you know, about, "Oh, your sister will do it for you. Your sister will iron your shirt." And I was thinking, you can take the iron just like I can, right? But my generation, I saw that coddling of the men. But that's not really how our culture works. We work with the women.
Yeah, Teresa, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, because I know you are a very outspoken supporter of the queer community. And I'm not sure if you had a chance to hear Kamala's response when she was asked how she felt about trans rights. I'd love to get your thoughts.
No, actually, I didn't. I haven't heard her response about that.
Yeah, so Deb kind of alluded to it, but she had this very, I guess, vague answer around like she thinks it's issue for the state law, so she believes in each state determining what their laws are
No,
around,
that's
you
not
know.
what she said. The question that was put to her was, "What do you think about affirming uh, gender affirming care?" And she said, "We have to follow the law."
I think gender affirming care is part of trans rights, right?
But
Yeah.
that's what she took it as, the surgery, right? And not as the overall care. So following the law, you get gender affirming care up until, you know, you can get the hormones and things like that at a young age, but you cannot do the final surgery.
Yeah, and so I
Okay.
think
So
like this is, you know, real quick, Teresa. I think this is where like honestly, like the pro Kamala people start to lose me a little bit because on one hand we're trying to say like this is a brilliant, smart, overly qualified person, and then we're now making excuses for her by not saying, oh, she didn't understand the question, or like, you know, she just answered from a lawyer's perspective. Like, is there any space to accept that she did not come out clear enough with the pro-trans stance as she should have if she wanted to win some of the vote of the people? But that was a really important issue for, is there, I guess, through some of these like dialogues folks are seeing, is there room to influence and shift the Democratic Party's views and Kamala's views on these sorts of things? And would we revert to things like, oh, she didn't understand the question, or she kept it high level vague and she answered as like a lawyer? Some of it feels a little dishonest, not going to lie around those things. So I think like
But you
unless
see,
like
I'm going to stand up for what it is. I asked. I went to go find the answer and have a conversation with a high level person. I asked the question. And so I think after having the conversation I had, I can say that in my interest, she did answer it like a lawyer. But the second part of that is, we'll never know if she could have further developed her answer because she's not president. You know, it's a gray area, but most people won't ask that question, because when somebody doesn't answer a question the way I like, I will ask them a more clarifying. What do you mean by that? I don't understand what you mean by that.
yeah, and I think that you know, you have an access that a lot of us do not have, right? To ask follow-up questions to high-level people in Kamala's campaign and stuff. So I think that again, we're putting the burden of effort on the people that are experiencing like some really heavy oppression and expecting them to ask follow-up questions and do like more follow-up research. Or she could have been very clear, like if that's not what she meant, she could have, you know, said she's a lawyer, right? She knows how to choose her words and things like that. So this
But
is where I'm
but
like,
this
I
is
think where
but
we lose
Sarah,
people.
you lose people, but this is where my point goes back to, you have leaders in each community. All right. I know where I stand in my community, primarily in the disability world, right? That's how I got my connections. I wasn't sitting there alone. There were queer community members asking the same question. Okay. Now you can blame us, hold us accountable of trying to figure out how to build our communities better. Because if you don't want to do it, or you don't have the access, is I'm going to give you the facts and you figure it out for yourself. So you make that decision for yourself. I can only give you the information and then you figure it out. And if you're like, you don't have access, then we're not building a community that serves us well because everybody has a different talent, everybody has different energy, right? And if we don't use the talents that we have to build community and to build trust among ourselves, we are going to have all sorts of excuses. And I don't
Right.
mean
And
to come down on you. It's just this,
no,
if we're
oh,
going to
I don't
be,
feel like you are. I just think that it's I think that when we continue to ask the people who are already every day waking up fighting for their right to exist to do even more to understand a candidate that was running for president of the United States, we're missing out on opportunity to coach the candidate around like, and I just frankly I think it's a cop out. Full transparency, I think it's a cop out. I think Kamala answered the question the way she wanted to answer it. She said it's a state rights issue, and that's her stance on trans rights, right? And that's harmful to the trans community. We all know that's harmful, especially with states like New Hampshire and them practicing anti-trans legislation. And instead of just coming out and saying that, we do this like mental gymnastics around, well, she wasn't asked the right question or she didn't expand on, or nobody followed up to get, more thoughts
I, I, I,
um,
res- I
on that. And
respect
until I
it.
hear it from her, all of this is just like hearsay, in my book.
Yeah, and I understand that. Then when the queer community leader comes back and gives you information, you know, you're going to say this is, uh, they're saying this is from the horse's mouth, sort of. How do we build community if you're not going to believe your leaders or they haven't gained trust to say this is what I heard from the horse's mouth, or this is what's coming down here's, because I'm having a hard time with, if we want to build community, okay? Not everybody has to think the same, but we have to
Right.
have we have to have the ability to say, okay, I sent this leader because I don't want to go. This is my person who's going to come back with the facts. Here are the facts. This is what I was told. I can't make a decision for you. This is my opinion because, here's the facts. This is what I gleaned from the fact. This is my opinion. You might have a different opinion. So
Yeah.
while I understand what you're saying, but how do you still have to build this community, and somebody has to go to places where you don't want to go or have no desire to go and bring back the information. Otherwise, we lack that communication that is needed.
Yeah, I
And
guess I'm more for a transparency than having messengers between like upper leadership and the people. Because my question would be like, why did those same community leaders not encourage Kamala to speak out on this topic in the same way she initially answered it? That was publicly in an interview, right? So that's where it needs to be addressed, not through these back channels back down to the quote unquote community.
I,
That's
I,
what would
I
have
would,
like given
I
me more
yeah,
confidence in the fact
ex-
that, I mean, is Kamala pro trans is the question. That's
the
that's what I'm
question,
looking for.
and
And based
I,
on her answer, she didn't come out strong enough in support
yeah,
of
but the
like
real, the
trans rights.
realization, she had to come, she worked out her policy. She had 137 days to do this in.
And
And
who put her in
it,
that position? Who put her in the position to only have that
well,
much time?
you you know what? Don't go. I will not go down there because the next thing I will say is, uh, I I was not in favor. I did not like how that went down at all. I thought it was white supremacy. I thought it was the white elitist um, making the decision, and some of them really wanted to have a contested um, DNC, and the only reason they chose Kamala is because they could not take the campaign money that was raised, and no one else could use it but her. So the whole situation was very political, very badly spent, very elitist, to say the least.
Yeah. So, Jess or Teresa, do you have any thoughts on what we were just talking about, or just that how Kamala was only given like a short amount of time to campaign?
I will say that I just wish she would have, either whatever way however she believes, I wish she would have said it instead of just having us not know, and then I can have state more of an opinion on what I thought about that. But just her not saying it kind of lets me believe that maybe she's not as um, pro trans, and that's just me just guessing because she didn't really say. So sometimes when you don't say something, that says a lot. And as far as only having as much time as she did, I'm not surprised. They always want us to work a miracle in the least amount of time, so I'm not surprised with that either. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah. So one of our questions is like, what does the treatment of Kamala by our own party teach us about the need for stronger independent Black political strategies? Do you think it's time that Black folks try to create their own political party?
Definitely. I mean, got to try something. We've been trying this for however long Democrats and Republicans have been around. We've been trying it, and we always get shafted, when we always kind of get used as a pawn on both sides. So it would be nice to know that we have somebody, because like I said, when Republicans and Democrats were invented, it was never with us in mind. So, and not much has changed in the rules and regulations of the Democrat and Republican Party. So I'm just guessing that we're probably still not thought about until it's time to make that vote. Then they're campaigning. So it would be nice to actually have a party that was actually invented for us, by us, for us, like FUBU.
Yeah. What do you think, Jess?
I agree. Because once we create something, we're gonna surpass everything that everyone else has always done, and that's why they try so hard for us to not create anything for ourselves, because we're gonna do better than what they have, and they don't want.
Mm.
Um, but I think if we could do something like that, it'll be good for our people.
Mm.
Definitely
And
need.
Deborah, I
I,
saw you. I Sorry. Go ahead, Jess.
it's
No, I was gonna say it's definitely needed for our future, our kids, so they could see something that's for them.
I
Mhm. Okay, go ahead, Deborah.
when creating third parties, all right, you have to start from dog catcher and build up. We can't just, it will take us several generations to have a separate political party. And not, I, and not that I don't think we could eventually be successful. Um, I think in the meantime, we have to have the political wherewithal, whether you're Republican or Democrat, is to put our people in places where they need to be. And we need to be able, people don't trust politicians, but we have to realize that it takes special people to want to do that particular type of work. They're not perfection, but it does take somebody who is really willing to do that work. And we have to figure out how to do that. How do we put our people in power? And I'm not sure doing a third party system under the current system that we have, it would be overly successful.
I definitely, I'm sorry, I definitely agree with you to say that it's a marathon. I think it's going to be a marathon. It has been a marathon. It's been 400, over 400 years for us of this kind of treatment. Just so I definitely agree. Anything that we do create, it is going to, we might not see it in our lifetime, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and I kind of feel similar to Deborah, but for different reasons because again, like I'm of the mindset that, politics, electoral politics is not what's going to protect Black people or liberate us because we just don't have the numbers. And again, that was once again reinforced with the results, right? And that's the thing, like with the political party, it's all a numbers game. You have to have the majority, and there aren't many spaces where we are in the majority. But for those spaces where we are, I think you know, action should be taken. If we, even if it does take generations, start now. Can you imagine if our grandparents had started something, what might exist today? We don't know. So I'm always for, like, again, I go back to, like, my agenda is to get people involved. And if people feel very strongly about, like, politics being the path towards liberation, then I wholeheartedly support trying to start like a Black led political party. But I don't think that's the best use of our time strategically. And again, we just have learned that there really is nobody in solidarity with us except ourselves. And so this is where I bias towards doing things that aren't dependent on convincing other people of our humanity, our right to exist, our need to get to have our needs met, things of that. And for me, that's like leveraging what our ancestors did by pulling together their resources, taking care of each other, starting cooperatives, community owned and led resources, and having more of that in place, which is, I guess, a good segue to the sort of last topic that we'll talk about is building community and a path forward. So I think we can all agree that, like, regardless of our views on the election and stuff like that, that community is the way forward. Building community is the way forward. So I want to ask, what can we learn from Black American cooperatives throughout history? And how could this model help us build resilience in challenging political times? Do any
I
specific Black-led cooperatives come to mind? Sorry, Teresa, go ahead.
I was actually gonna say we can actually learn from both sides, like from Malcolm X and from Martin Luther King, because sometimes you need a little bit of salt, and sometimes you need a little bit of sugar. So Martin Luther King, I felt like was more like the peaceful one, like come in peace, and you see what still happened to him. Um, but sometimes you do need to have, you get more bees with honey. But then Malcolm X, he was the one like, you hit me, I hit you back. You know, so I think that we need a little bit of both. We need all perceptions and perspectives of life to beat this ugly beast because it's been around for over 400 years.
So you're saying, like, we need a diversity of thoughts and
Hmm.
ideas if we're gonna be successful and come together as Black people. Like, you're thinking of Malcolm on one end and Martin on
Yes.
the other end. There, we need everybody on both ends and in
And in
between.
between, yeah, exactly. Jinx.
Well,
Yeah. Um,
that's, I always think that way, right? But when I think about community in New Hampshire, I always feel left out. I mean, we had one event on my side of the state, and I was so happy uh, that we did that. But um, I just wish we realized that Black people live all over this state and how we can come into community together. I can understand having the hub, but realize that sometimes communities, there's only 4 or 5 of us, or maybe just one family that has to live in a piece of, you know, that we can travel. We can extend our community so that um, we all know that we have a place and belong, right? And there is no shame in anybody's game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I'm a doctor, and I can't tell you how many times in my lifetime people say, "Oh, you're a doctor." And my attitude, if you wanted to go what I went through to get this particular title, you can do it. I will help you do it. Just make sure you want to do it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a different message than putting me on a pedestal and saying how wonderful I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you bring up the a good point, and especially our state of distance, right? Yeah, most of us live in South Central New Hampshire, but there are those of us who exist in the more remote locations, and I think this is where we can also learn about the tenacity and perseverance of our ancestors, because you imagine the cooperatives that existed prior to things like the car and public transportation, and then even when they did have those things, we were excluded from using them. And so our ancestors had to be determined, right, to get to each other sometimes and connected. So, I wish that we could channel some of that determination, tenacity, and perseverance. Of course, we all have our challenges. Some of us don't have reliable transportation. There are still things that, keep us apart. But this is where we need to like get creative. Can we start like carpool chains, stuff like that? That's what I definitely want to see more of. To Deborah is, just in creativity and addressing these things that divide us maybe physically right now. And then we also need people from these remote locations who are willing to step up and lead and be part of building, because we need representation in these areas, of course, to keep, the community building going. So definitely agree with you on that. Jess, your thoughts on what we can learn from Black American cooperatives?
I think just learn to try to trust each other. So we can all work together and just do what we need to do. Because
Hmm.
the only way we're gonna get by, we have to try to start trusting each other and try to build a community. I
Yeah,
think
and that
the big factor
oh, sorry.
because a lot of people don't trust. Like I'm not pooling my money together with that person, so they could go do whatever they do with it. Like there's no trust. I mean, I get it, but we gotta try somewhere somehow.
Yeah, we got to be willing to take risks on each other. And I know that's really hard because we have a lot of reason to not trust and stuff. And so it's hard. So, we also can explore like how do we make it easier to trust each other? There are certain sorts of types of legal protections that you can have when you do like more of a legal cooperative, right? Where you're like filing with the state and you're, doing all of that. So that might be able to afford a little bit more protection for those who might be risk averse, have a little bit more difficulty trusting others. Whereas for some, that would be a big turnoff doing things through legal channels, because then you have government oversight and um, you're just on the radar, right? So I think it's about providing options to our community, like recognizing and respecting and meeting people where they're at, right? Like I guess I could turn my wheels trying to convince people to trust each other, or I could meet us where we're at, where we might not always have the highest level of trust for each other, and provide options that take that into consideration, right? And then we begin on how do we build that trust, with each other. But if we wait for the trust to come first, we're gonna be waiting. We're gonna be waiting a long time, y'all. So we gotta all we it's a balancing act. You gotta be willing to take on some risks, and we also have to provide some protections.
But
As well.
I'm just remembering a story that my grandmother told us. Um, you know, where she lived, fresh vegetables were, by the time it got to the black store, they were kind of iffy, right? So she said, um, she remembers uh, everybody was gardening, even if it was just a windowsill little garden. But they came together and they got this unused plot of land and got permission to farm it, right? And the only thing they would people will donate seeds, but if you couldn't donate a seed, then donate your labor. And those simple cooperatives, I think sometimes we think of these huge cooperatives and they would do, it's like, why not just start simple and saying, okay, I have this acreage of land, I'll give you some seeds. Those who come and provide seeds will get so much, but if you can't provide anything, please provide your labor and we'll split up the vegetables, right? It's as simple as that. So I just think we need to, if we're going to take that step in building trust and cooperation, why not just build something simple?
Yeah, exactly. We don't have to jump into the deep end, right? You dip our toe in, take, test the temperature a little bit. And I think that's what we hope, that our social club can act as a space for that. And it is a form of a cooperative, right? All social clubs are. It's like your community, people are coming together around a shared hobby or interests and stuff like that. So I think, definitely, Deborah, we could start with some smaller sort of cooperations, and see how they grow from there. But you mentioned one kind of Black-led cooperative that has existed throughout time, and that's like whether it's a community garden or somebody just simply sharing some of their land so folks can either be part of growing food. What other kinds of Black-led cooperatives do you think could meet the needs of our community now, especially in light of some of the fears and anxieties that have been expressed over the last week as a result of the election results? How might our cooperatives, Black-led cooperatives, be able to help provide some protection and security?
I think legal protection. I think healthcare. I think childcare. Um, rides. Just things like that for
And
longevity.
I think there's a lot of professionals in in the group. And I belong to the millennials of color. I am not a millennium, so I'm just there. They like me, so I'll pretend to be that young. There's a lot of different talents that sits in the state that we don't tap into, right? So we have to look around and see who is not engaging.
Yeah, sometimes I feel it's crabs in the barrel though when it's like a lot of different organizations like that. I feel like sometimes people feel like they're competing with instead of just working together.
You know what? You're absolutely right because I come from the disability community, right? And I got to tell you, I got so much pushback when I asked, what's your platform on disability? Right? Got a lot of platform. So now, because of everything, I can go in spaces and say, we need to start walking arm in arm. And more people are willing to listen to that and stop being the crab in the barrel. And it's like, There are some things the social group does, and I want to be there, but it was like, I don't need to dress like grandma because I'm that age already. I'm trying to avoid it, you know? Um, you know, I, and I feel a little sad because there are things that are lacking in my life, that the simple having childcare, a babysitter so that my husband can come too is interesting. So but how can we collaborate together and not be crabs in the barrel? How can
Mhm.
we take an axe to the barrel but let out release our talents?
Yeah, I think childcare is definitely a huge need in our community, and um, is I think about it as like being, a way to increase accessibility. If childcare isn't a concern for folks, they're able to engage more, do all sorts of things, even just rest. I think people just need it just to rest, right? So I would love to see us do something around childcare. I know that there are some existing organizations that offer some childcare resources, assistance with childcare, leverage that. But I would love to see us do something like Black led around it. I'm always thinking like for us, by us. So I think childcare, absolutely. I think what we heard from folks during the election is that we're all feeling the pinch of the penny right now. So anything that's going to help us to get our needs met while not increasing our expenditures, I think is going to be something that seeks to bring us together. So we already talked about like doing things like community gardens, addressing food security, like by coming together. Um, we talked, Tracy, you mentioned like healthcare, right? I also like I'm obviously 100% behind, you know, um, sort of Western, I guess, medicine and stuff. But I also think that we could bring some of our ancestral medicine back. There's a lot of like home remedies that can be helpful in certain situations. I'm not saying all the time, right? Because at a certain point, you do need to turn to the doctor in dire situations. But that's a way for us to reconnect with our culture and get our needs met. So that's what I'm sort of like
But
um, focused on as a priority, is like how can we reconnect through our culture and get the needs of our community that. So I think of like just different ways of cooperating around healthcare, and then we also talk a lot about housing and eventually having like a resident owned community at some point, and trying to obtain land that we can build on so that we can build a Black neighborhood, right? And on that land also, be more self-sustaining, more ecologically, friendly, reconnecting, sort of with the land. So that's what I see as sort of like the opportunities for community-led cooperatives, for us. Jess, did we hear from you yet?
I like the idea of having like a wellness center, like where people can go for Monday meditation, like Reiki, uh, readings, or someone teaching something that they know, um, drumming night, something like that. I think that'll be good.
I want to see us gain. I mean, the system that we have right now is broken. I'm not going to lie, right? But I want to see us. If somebody else is getting $1, we need to get $2. You see here what I'm saying? We need to be right in there and gaming the system. Gaming is not the right word, but it's like I'm sitting at the disability rights community. If there's something not going right, I just need a whisper in my ear to maybe see if I can make it right. Or maybe I know something that you don't know, and here's the words that I need you to say, you know, and that's what's going to get us something. So I am pragmatic, but I wanted us to dream. All right. But I'm the pragmatic. This is that, okay, we want that plot of line up there, and here's the money over here, and they're not for us, but what are the words that we could use to get that?
You're speaking our language, Deborah. So
Yeah,
we already we yeah
yeah.
we talk a lot about this as in our like collective strategy meetings, stuff like that, where we're going to go after whatever is available to us, because that's how other racial groups have been able to build quote unquote generational wealth and stuff like that. They're just finding the loop. Not we're looking for loopholes necessarily, but whatever. If it's available, we'll go after it. But that's exactly how we need to be thinking, is how to leverage like the funds that do exist for things, like even connecting it, like I mentioned, like how we want to get some land and have a resident owned community on it, but it's also about living sustainably. Well, then that opens the door to more environmental justice types of grants over,
I-
or in addition to big grants that are maybe more explicitly about like purchasing land and
and
providing housing.
sometimes, as much as I hate incrementalism and talking political talk in grants, sometimes that political around and around language is what they want to hear to give you the money.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, who can write the round and around? Because I can't, but if you can, let's come together and
Right.
get that thing.
Exactly. Yeah, just
So
gotta
yeah,
gotta learn how to speak the language. Yeah.
yeah, and I have found, the DRC wants to recruit more ethnic people.
Mm,
You know, now these are not dumb people, okay? They're not. So I sat in a meeting. I said, "Have you advertised in any of the HBCUs? Maybe somebody down there has some connection with disability and is willing to come to the freezing north." You never know, right? Until you ask. And and they look at me as like, "Really? Did you? Oh, you thought about that? Yeah. You know, how do you do that? How do you do it in any college? I don't know. You're the ones who write the thing." So it's just a matter of, it's more than keeping the eye on the prize. It's more of less, okay, I know this is a game for you, and you usually come out on top. But if I get as suave with the language as you do, right? A lot of people don't realize, because of my last,
Exactly. Join our team, girl. We're looking for more community members. Join our team, committee members.
I'll join, but I'm in law school right now, so I have to be very careful, because I I decided at my age that if you tell me I have to have a JD behind my name to be heard, let me get it and show you what, because I'm
mm,
not listening to that excuse.
Right.
But I have to be careful, because I would say yes to this, and you would ask me something else, and I will say yes to that. But I will tell you, I am so internally competitive with myself. If I get less than an A minus, I'm ready to jump off my roof of my house. And my husband has given me directions only to jump off the garage roof into the bushes. You won't get as hurt. So
That's a lot.
I,
Going to law school is a lot, so I definitely understand.
I'm just saying, if you want somebody who going to stand up and not be, I will always be kind. I will always be kind, but I'm going to hold myself and you guys accountable. I don't care who you vote for. I don't care what your opinions are. I'm a fact person, so facts are a little bit better. But we want to do something, and we have to come together, and talents have to come together.
yes, and so that's a good segue, I think, to the last question for tonight's discussion, is what actions can we take more immediately to support each other during this period of uncertainty and as we build for the future? So, Deb, do you want to start us off with that?
You know, what I find is difficult is, and I understand the need to be Black held, um, but I believe that there's a lot of BIPOC in this state that we need to sort of hold each up together and be accountable. And I think now is the time for us to say, community. And I'm not even going to say beloved community. I'm not going to say any of that. I'm going to say the communities that were in our history. So if we don't know what our ancestors did, start reading books by Black authors telling us what our ancestors did. And you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised that Madam C.C. Walker, she was the one who invented Avon, really, by selling her products door to door through women salesmen. You know, we come from greatness. We need to learn how much we stand on our ancestors' shoulders and how an account for we have sat down a little bit, and we blame a lot of different things on that, and some of it is true, but to be resilient, we need to stand back up and say not today.
Awesome. Thank you, Deborah. Teresa, what about you? What do you think? What actions can we take immediately to support each other?
I think immediately to support each other is giving each other grace as we do other races. We do give each other people. We're a forgiving race. And do feel like we are readily to forgive other races and not our own. Um, I also think that we can stop killing each other because there are a lot of us disregarding each other's lives, because of the situations that we are in. Poverty and things like that makes you do things you might not necessarily do if you weren't in those situations. So I think that we just need to love each other more and just hold each other accountable, but also give each other grace.
Thank you, Teresa. Jess, what about you?
I just think we need to check in with each other more often. Even though we might disagree on some things, we're still in this together, regardless. I think just checking on you or whoever, just make sure they're doing all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Jess. And then from my perspective, I would just like to see, I don't know if it's something that we could do immediately, do it. If not, begin making plans. But I want us to call our energy back from environments and efforts that don't have us in mind. And I want us to call that energy back and put it into our own community. I always think about like what our community of like socialites, what might be possible for it if we had more people involved in, maintaining this space and stuff and this effort. And um, I think it would be just like amazing. And so my challenge to folks is to look for places where you can, call your energy back, spaces where it's not being appreciated, where you're being exploited, taken advantage of, where it's not benefiting, you. Call that energy back and bring it into our community. We need it now more than ever. The more people that we have involved, the lighter the workload is around, and you'll be able to hear stories directly from different community members that maybe previously you might have been quick to write off because they don't share your point of view or whatever. It's harder to do that when you are building you're working shoulder to shoulder with those folks to build up the Black community of the state and nearby. So that would be my wish for all of us. But any other final thoughts that folks would like to share before we bring our live to an end for this evening?
I
I
would
just
like to. Oh, you go first.
I just think that chocolate Chuck Diamond says, I have some land. Let's figure out something out, education, finance. So we might have a first step right there. I don't know who they are.
We know who that is.
Yeah. So I mean, it's sitting right there, and she went on the deep end as far as I'm concerned. And if we let her off the hook, that's that's our problem, not hers.
Right. Noted. Absolutely. Um, yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to identify with your name, Stephanie, but yes, it is Stephanie. um, yeah, well, thank you so much, Deborah, Teresa, and Jess, for just speaking your truth this evening, helping us hold space for this conversation tonight. I think a lot of valid points were made, and hopefully, we're walking away with a little bit better of an understanding of a different perspective than what we walked into this conversation with. And hopefully, this is not the end, right? That it's just a continuation of the work that we've already started, others have started, and lots more to come. Lots more conversation, lots more action, everything to come.
Dun
So
dun dun.
yes. So stay tuned. And we appreciate our viewers for staying with us tonight and, giving us support in the chat. We love y'all. Thanks for joining us.
Good
All right,
night.
everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.